Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to Solar Power Europe's second last report launch event this year. Today, we would like to share with you the brand new results of our European market outlook for residential battery storage. My name is Michael Schmela, and I'm the Executive Advisor and Director Market Intelligence of Solar Power Europe. I have the pleasure to accompany you through the next 60 minutes of this launch webinar as the moderator. Next slide and next slide. We are living in very insecure times in Europe. With Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, a war is taking place in Europe that has caused an unprecedented energy crisis, driving really skyrocketing electricity prices. While 2 years ago, it's almost hard to remember, at home we talked a lot about the pandemic. Now it's about soaring energy prices. People in Europe are even afraid of blackouts. In consequence, citizens are increasingly looking at home solar power generation as a key tool to gain control of the energy bill. And while European citizens seek to hedge on their energy supply and turn their back on polluting and costly fossil fuels or even unreliable nuclear power plants, as we see in France, the distributed solar rooftop boom brings with it something that seems somehow to be often overlooked in policy circles. And that's a massive growth in residential battery energy storage. Because finally, that's what also keep the lights on in any case. And that's what today's webinar is about. We will first share the main findings of the third edition of our annual residential solar batteries market outlook. We will then have SolarEdge, one of the world's premier and innovative solar rooftop inverter, and as of recently also battery producers, explain why the battery is such an instrumental part of a solar system to provide both energy savings and security for homeowners. And finally, we will have a fire chat with a representative of the European Commission to discuss their view on residential solar and battery storage. Next slide, please. Just one thing, as time is tight, please ask your questions in the chat function. So we won't have a special Q&A, but you can really type your questions or comments at any time in the chat function, and our speakers will try to answer them directly. Okay, let's start with the first presentation. My colleague Christoph Litz, market analyst in our market intel department, was also mostly responsible for modeling our forecasts, will share our report results. Christoph, we are very much looking forward to the positive market news on residential solar and storage. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Michael, and hello, everyone. So as Michael mentioned, my name is Christoph, and my mission now for the next 15 minutes will be to guide you through our last report, so the European market outlook for residential battery storage. So Chiara, if you can move already 2 slides away. Yep. And 1 slide further. So to start really this presentation, and before we jump on the analysis of European storage development itself, it's worth to have a look at the quick development and how the current business case for residential storage in Europe is happening. Today, it should not come as a news to anyone that the price of electricity in Europe is actually surging for now a year and a half. You can see on the graph on the right that the price increased sharply at the end of 2021. That is mostly following the economic recovery from COVID, and the average residential price actually reached 19 euro cents per kilowatt hour for the first time, and it keeps rising. Earlier this year, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has actually worsened the condition, and now the whole continent is now on a wider energy crisis. This increase in power prices is very much reflected on household and on their electricity bills. So within this context in mind, we are actually seeing more and more households turning to PV and storage as a way to lower the energy bill. To answer to that increasing demand, the technology has developed quite well in the last decades, and the price for storage and PV actually decreased. You can see that evolution on the left part on the left graph. And we can also notice that somewhere in the middle of the graph, between 2021 and still in 2022, those 2 years constitute somewhat a dip in the sense that prices increased mostly due to post-lockdown condition and difficult economic condition following the COVID recovery. But on overall, the trend for the future is still expected to go down in terms of price. So having this in mind is very important because it highlights that the cost of solar as storage is getting more and more attractive when compared to the price that households are paying right now for the electricity coming from the grid. So this overall context of high electricity price and low cost of storage plus PV really serve now as a base ground for the deployment of batteries in Europe. And we can move to the next slide. So now, starting with this slide, we have the actual analysis of the deployment of residential storage in Europe. So if you were already present during our webinar from last year, you might remember that the 2 major milestones were reached in 2020. It was the first time that the annual European residential battery surpassed the gigawatt-hour mark, and also the first time that over 100,000 batteries were installed in a single year. In 2021, though, the market really entered a new phase and we have surpassed all those records. So the market doubled following a 107% growth path that broke all the previous records. This year, in 2021, the annual residential storage installed 2.3 gigawatt hour. That is more than 250,000 batteries that were installed on the continent in 2021. So as mentioned before, it is not a surprise that this growth was mostly triggered by the high electricity price across Europe and the fact that households in general looked at PV and storage as a mean to reduce those electricity prices. However, we have to keep in mind that if that growth is impressive, the potential market could actually have been even much larger. In 2021, and mainly it will probably continue in 2022 this year, there was a severe shortage of battery that limits really the possibility to meet the demand from customer, and that caused long delays in installation. What we witness is that sometimes we have a PV that's installed on rooftop, the PV is there, the inverter is there, and we're waiting, or customer are waiting 6, 7 to 8 months before having the battery actually also installed. So we can move on the next slide. And the next slide is actually showing the counterpart of that growth. So here we have the cumulative growth, and that growth, the growth that we observe on an annual basis, is very well reflected in the growth on the total operating storage capacity in Europe. So from just over 3 gigawatt hour in 2020, the complete fleet grew to 5.4 gigawatt hour in 2021, which represents a 74% year-on-year growth and over 600,000 battery installed in total in Europe. What's interesting to notice also in 2021 is that the annual market growth rate was actually higher than the growth rate in cumulative capacity. So for the newly installed capacity, this number grew at a rate of 107%, compared to 74% for the total operating fleet. This is really a key sign that gives the sensation that the total operating fleet has reached quite a substantial volume now, and that the technology has now entered a new deployment phase. And it's pretty impressive that if you look just 5 years ago, in 2016, the market has grown 13 times in size since 5 years ago. So we can move to the next slide. And on that slide, thank you. On that slide, so we can actually have a deeper development across the different European markets. So we see that while the overall picture is still largely dominated by a couple of countries, we are still seeing a trend toward more diversification. So if we start the top 5 from the beginning, so from the left, it's no surprise that Germany remains the leading country for residential storage systems in 2021. In that year, the country added around 1.3 gigawatt hour of new capacity, which is an 80% growth, year-on-year growth. Important to note, it is also the first time that one single country actually added more than 1 gigawatt hour in a single year. And also interesting to notice on Germany is that the leading position is actually decreasing. Last year, Germany had about 68% of the market share, down to 59% in 2021. So almost a 10% decrease from one year to another. This is justifying our view toward more diversification in the market, and we're seeing more actors. On the second spot, we have Italy, which is certainly the largest surprise across all European markets in 2021. What happened there is that the market really felt the positive effects of what is called actually the super bonus 110%. That is a bonus that was introduced in 2020 as part of the recovery program from the COVID, and it allows home owners to deduct up to 110% of their expense related to home energy efficiency renovation, which includes PV and storage. So thanks to that bonus, the Italian market really jumped from 94 megawatt hour added in 2020 to 321 megawatt hour in 2021. So simply put, the market tripled in a single year. And looking at the third place, here we find Austria, which actually gained one spot from 2020 and is not closing our top three. The battery market in Austria also tripled in a year, from 41 megawatt hour in 2021 to 143 megawatt hour. In Austria, that increase is mostly driven by the growth in the residential PV sector, which also grew more than 100% in 2021 and installed 340 megawatts of newly installed PV capacity on the residential segment. Then to close the top five, we have the United Kingdom and Switzerland. So both countries have actually very different profile. The UK is what we could call a free market, in which there is no specific support scheme allocated to residential storage, whereas on the other hand, Switzerland is supporting the market with different subsidies available. And in terms of capacity added in 2021, the UK added 128 megawatt hour and Switzerland added 79 megawatt hour in 2021. So moving to the next slide, and we can have another view on the top five market that we have previously. And we can actually see that the top five are pretty much playing on their own for the moment. In 2021, they were still responsible for 88% of installed capacity. That is a large share, but it is a decreasing share. If we look at the rest of European country, they actually added 359 megawatt hour in 2021, which is 150% more than what they installed the year before in 2020. And what is very interesting is that among those rest of European countries that we have included in one group, there is some emerging markets that are really set to play a key role in the future. So here we're really seeing Spain and Poland, which are both characterized by a thriving residential PV market. In both markets, so in Spain and Poland, the self-consumption is really getting increasingly attractive, and it starts to trickle down and to have a positive impact on battery development. On other new country, we are also seeing Sweden that will become a key player in the next 5 years. Right now, the market, the PV market is really growing on the residential segment, and there's also subsidies available for battery storage. So if we combine this with the penetration of electrical vehicles and high electricity consumption per capita, we are really seeing a great mix here for the development of residential storage. Still, from that picture, we are still missing the Netherlands. So even if the residential PV is one of the key segments of the country and one of the largest in Europe, the fact that the country has a net metering scheme in place right now is kind of a killer for the market, and it remains still pretty uncertain how and when this scheme, the net metering scheme, will be phased out. So moving on the next slide. So now that we had a current overview of the year 2021, we can actually turn the analysis toward the future, which is actually what is interesting us for us. So if you look at the next 5 years on the residential storage market, the question is not really whether the market will grow, but it is rather how steep that growth will be. If we look at the current political and economic environment right now, it is mainly characterized by high electricity prices and a concern on energy security. This has strongly improved the case for home storage in battery, both from a business point of view and also from a psychological point of view, as Michael was mentioning before, with customers which are fearing blackouts. That's something that we're seeing pretty much often on the news. So both from a business and psychological point of view, the current climate is really pushing residential storage. So for a quick wrap up, after the market passed 1 gigawatt hour in 2020, it passed 2 gigawatt hour in 2021, and our medium scenario, which is the orange line that you can see on the graph, this scenario is expecting up to 3.9 gigawatt hour to be installed in 2022, so in this year. So this year means that it's a 71% increase from 2021, which was already a 107% increase for the year before. So compared to last year outlook, this is actually a very significant upward revision of our expectation. The market we are seeing for this year in 2022, we were only expecting it to see it in 2024, so 2 years later. Then following that growth in 2022, our medium scenario forecasts deployment of 4.5 gigawatt hour in 2023, 5.1 gigawatt hour in 2024, 6 in 2025, and 7.3 in 2026. If we consider our low and high scenario, which is the blue bar and the yellow bar, in 2026, the market could actually be as large as 4.5 gigawatt hour in our low scenario, and up to 11.3 gigawatt hour if the right policy framework is in place. So in the short term, what will decide in which scenario we will lean to? It will mostly prevail on how fast the supply bottleneck and the availability of battery can be resolved. As I mentioned before, a lot of customers are waiting several months before having a batteries, and depending on how fast this supply issue will be resolved, it will depend on which scenario we are leaning to. Then on the next slide, we are also, as previously, looking at the other side of the same coin, basically. So briefly, we are looking at the total installed residential storage capacity in the future, so up to 2026. And here, as for the annual deployment, we are seeing very high growth rates over the coming years. So in our medium scenario, we expect the cumulative residential storage capacity to reach 9.3 gigawatt hour in 2022, so up from 5.4 in 2021. For the following years, the prospects are also pretty bright. We're expecting from 14 gigawatt hour installed in 2023 up to 32 gigawatt hour in 2026. And the growth rates are consistently above 29%, for all years. So moving on the next slide, what we think is very important here is actually to have a focus on what's happening in 2022 in this year. If we focus here on the total installed capacity in 2022, the market actually reached a very important milestone. So by the end of this year, so in 3 weeks, basically, in Europe, there will be more than 1 million residential storage units that will have been installed at the end of this year. So this 1 million units is a major milestone for the market, and it really reflects the scale of the growth from 2021 and 2022. If we look further to 2026, when we expect the cumulative fleet to be around 32 gigawatt hour, we can expect to have about 3.5 million residential storage units across the continent. And moving to the next slide, which actually will be my last slide before the conclusion. Here we're trying to have a more deeper look to how the future will look in terms of regional development. So we are here counting the total installed capacity, the new installed capacity between 2022 and 2026. And on that matrix, we are still seeing Germany to be the leader. So on overall, the home storage, the storage segment is expected to follow the path of the residential solar PV segment. So here the market is really backed by a strong demand for solar and storage, and really the will to reduce the electricity bill. On the second position, and I have 1 minute, so I'll speed up a little bit. On the second position, we have Italy. Prospects are also very bright for the country, but it's hard to not overestimate the impact the super bonus has on the market. So we're expecting the super bonus actually decreasing in 2023. So we are expecting to see quite a decrease, but still it will be backed by electricity price. And then on the top 3, 4, and 5, pretty interestingly, here's on the top 3 that we are seeing Poland, which will be a new country and a new key market on the map, on the European storage map. So it used to have a net metering program for PV, and that ended up in 2022. So we are expecting to see a high growth rates for storage in those countries. And we can move to the next slide, which is the last line, the conclusion, actually. So what can you remember from this? I think it was pretty clear. On firstly, the market grew really heavily in 2021 and reached a 107% annual growth and add over 2 gigawatt-hour for the first time. Very interestingly too is that the European market storage will continue to grow in 2022 and will add 3.9 gigawatt-hour. So what it means is that by the end of the year, we will reach, at the end of this year, we will reach 1 million units installed on Europe. And so finally, really to finish, up to 2026, we are really expecting to have a large development. We expect the market to grow 6-fold in the next coming 5 years. It could be, so the market could be as high as 32.2 gigawatt-hour if we follow our medium scenario in 2026. But in our high scenario, we could even reach 44 gigawatt-hour in 2026. And this could happen if we put the right policy framework in place. And those policy framework will actually be discussed at the end of this session, with our representative from the Commission. So stay tuned if you want to know more on those policy. And with that, I think I've concluded the highlights of our report. Feel free to download it on our website, and I'll give back the floor back to Michael.
Thanks, Christoph. Great summary. So after we've learned about the exciting developments and further great prospects for residential solar and storage from Christoph, we are now glad to have with us a representative from the industry to get some first-hand information. So we have with us SolarEdge, which is a pioneer in rooftop solar grid connection devices and safety, an active member of Solar Power Europe, and the exclusive sponsor of this report. So we have today with us Inbal Cooper, who is the Global Residential Marketing Manager of SolarEdge, and she's responsible for spearheading the company's marketing efforts for all residential solutions. Inbal, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michael, for the introduction. And thank you, Christoph, for sharing these very interesting findings about residential solar batteries. So now we all have a bit of a better idea of the growth that's coming our way in Europe for residential storage. And one thing I think we need to ask ourselves is, what is the importance battery storage has in residential PV installations? And why is it becoming and will become even more significant in the next few years? And when looking down at the end consumers who end up owning a PV system, an important question that they're asking and must be asked is just how essential are batteries becoming in a PV system? So let's find out and go to the next slide. So wait, one back. Thank you. So like Michael presented me, my name is Inbal Cooper. I'm the Global Marketing Manager for residential PV sector at SolarEdge. And so although I'm based in Tel Aviv, I work very closely with the European market, and through the many visits I've had in multiple countries and by attending many industry events, I've gained the knowledge and the trends and in solar power growth and in general across Europe. But enough about me, let's get to the gist of things. And to better understand the role of residential battery storage, let's take a step back to explore a bigger question. So what is happening in the global energy market and in Europe specifically? So I think we're all experiencing changing and transformations that we see around us. And the changes in the energy market are driven by a number of different elements. So we all know about global warming and efforts to reduce carbonization, but that is also coupled with a few other drivers, such as heavier use of electrical devices, a transition from centralized energy to a distributed energy format. And of course, the rising costs in electricity prices, which we saw earlier, is also a driver for adopting battery storage. Now, the rising cost in electricity prices is very significant across Europe, maybe even more so than anywhere else around the world. So all these trends that we see around us are transforming the way we're using energy. And that means that we need new solutions to support them. That's how battery storage is becoming a key player in the PV industry. So on the next slide, I'll start talking about the electrification trend and the electrification element. So according to statistics, electricity consumption is expected to double by 2035 and more than triple by 2050. Now, there are some obvious reasons that some of us may think to ourselves that, like, we're spending more time at home and we use more appliances, but there's also a more global effect that is happening. And that could be due to the fact that we have an expected population growth and urbanization trend. So just last month, we've actually reached the world population of 8 billion. And that number is only going to get higher and higher, making the fact that we're going to need more power supplied to our population. At the same time, more appliances running on electricity as an energy source are being used in each and every home. And that includes, for example, space and water heating and automobiles, so electric vehicles, which are seeing an increase of those across Europe. Now, if we go to the next slide, I would love to give you just a better idea of how this electrification trend is affecting an average home. So when we look, for example, at an electric vehicle, so we've discovered that by getting a single electric vehicle in a household, that can add so much as 47% additional electricity consumption. And that's, again, only when talking about a single vehicle. So the increase in electric vehicles and the general usage of more electricity makes a huge impact on battery storage and the need to have that as an additional power source. And batteries are now becoming more essential to power these additional loads. And if we're looking at electric vehicle, for example, and looking ahead at what's coming, we know that electric vehicles obviously have batteries in them. And so the batteries within the electric vehicles in the future can also become a source that can be brought back into the home. All of this is making tremendous changes in the way that the PV industry is working and operating, and in the way that we need to build our PV systems. So if we move to the next slide, we can go over to the second element that is affecting energy markets, and that is the drive for clean power generation. So solar alone is growing exponentially and has become the most popular renewable energy source. Now, of course, this is encouraged through more and more governments, companies, and individuals making renewable energy targets, investments, and initiatives. So we know that PV is an important tool in transforming our energy landscape, but we also know that PV has its drawbacks, and renewable energy in general has some drawbacks. So if we think of when the sun isn't shining and when the wind isn't blowing, battery storage can actually be the thing or the solution that's keeping the renewable energy power going during those times. So with this decarbonization, we believe that the way that we are going to consume and produce energy is also going to look very different in the future. So in the next slide, I want to talk about the fact of how we're moving from centralized fossil fuel-based energy to distributed energy that's also cleaner. So with a PV system, anyone can become a prosumer. So instead of only getting energy from the grid, they can produce it for themselves, and then the leftover can be fed into the grid. So now they become also suppliers of electricity. And this basically creates a decentralized network with nodes that produce and consume energy. And we see this trend not only in homes, we see it in any sort of power connected place. So if we think of batteries in that context, and if we look at homes, so batteries are acting as an additional power source that can be attached in each node and then used by others within the network, such as the utility. For example, when the demand is at peak and the utility needs to stabilize the grid, or for other homes within the network. So if we move to the next slide, we're going to talk about the last, but definitely not least shift in the energy market as we see it. And this is something that we've all been affected by, we've all experienced, and Michael has also mentioned it earlier as part of the driver for the growth in battery adoption and demand in general. And that is, of course, the price of electricity. And that has a major influence on battery storage adoption and PV adoption in general. And so here's why we think Europe continues to grow such a positive momentum when it comes to PV and battery storage adoption. So with electricity prices increasing significantly in the last 2 years for homes and for commercial electricity, alongside the fact that oil and gas prices are also climbing and going up significantly, we notice a trend that is the move from heating home with oil and gas to using heat pumps. And that also connects to the electrification trend, which we talked about earlier, because we see that it's all kind of connected and happening at the same time, and they're driving each other. So by having higher prices for electricity consumption or for gas and oil, that helps people to move to electric-based appliances. Now, another thing that we know is that due to those increasing prices and the variability in the changing prices, we know that energy independence has become a top priority in Europe and in renewable energy. And it's understood to be a key in becoming energy independent. So when you think of battery storage, we often think of maximizing self-consumption or protecting a home from a power outage. But the fact is that battery storage is like an extra container of power, allowing a home to fill up that extra energy at a lower cost and then use later on when prices are becoming extremely high. So knowing all the various transformations that are driving the global energy transition, we also become aware of the boundaries of solar power generation and PV in general. So PV only produces during the day. That is a limitation that we all know. And that means that most people, when they're actually at home and need to use the majority of the power, that's happening in the evening when PV systems are not necessarily producing after sundown. And another thing that we know is that when the grid stops functioning, some PV system, or actually most PV systems that are not attached to battery storage, are also not functioning and are not helping homeowners to have backup power. So what this means is that it's becoming clear that PV is major, but only a part of the solution. So if you click one more time, please. So we see that we need a way to store energy and use it when we need it to. We need a way to manage and oversee the production and consumption in a home so that we can optimize it for maximum use of reusable sources. So with that in mind, here at SolarEdge, we knew that we have to have a very good answer to these needs. And if we go to the next slide, we can see how going beyond solar and including battery storage in a PV system is becoming key. So by combining PV storage, backup, and additional devices such as EV charger and smart devices that are able to control energy usage of home appliances, SolarEdge has built a full energy ecosystem that takes PV and even storage to the next level. So we talked earlier today, and we saw in Michael's presentation about the pace of energy transformation and how battery storage adoption rates differ between different countries. And we saw that in some countries, it's more economical to add battery storage, and so it'll become more popular sooner. For example, we saw Germany, Italy, UK, and in other countries, however, the battery adoption would be slower, like the Netherlands, for example, where we know that they have the net metering scheme. So on the trend of battery adoption, some will say that they're falling behind. And that brings us to the need to make sure that energy ecosystems are actually ready for future changes, whether they are in the form of incentives, tariffs, or reliability of the grid. And so that means that with SolarEdge Home, you can start installing what you need today. And when time comes to easily add the storage battery, the backup capability, the EV charging, and all those additional devices that help homeowners at the end of the day to face those changes in the energy market. So if we move to the next slide, I'll talk briefly about the SolarEdge Home Battery, which we introduced last year. And so the SolarEdge Home Battery is basically a storage solution that is designed to meet the growing demand PV system owners have and potential owners have for energy flexibility and home backup. So with the battery, excess solar power that is generated and not used by the home can be stored and used after sundown, during peak rates, or to power heavy energy consuming appliances. When there's a utility outage or extreme weather event that cuts off grid power, the battery can continue to power the home in a backup mode. So if we go to the next slide, at the end of the day, we can kind of see that when choosing residential storage, homeowners are not thinking necessarily about the huge transformation and all the big trends that us inside the industry are familiar with and know that are happening, and they're the drivers for that growth. At the end of the day, they have their day-to-day reasons for making them choose battery storage, from potential utility outages, through extreme weather events that also affect power outages. They want to save on utility rates. They want to program their system based on time of use management, right? To charge when the cost is low, and then use that power in the battery when the cost of the grid power is very high. They want to gain independence from the grid. And of course, they want to have full control over all the energy that they produce, store, and consume. So at the end of the day, when talking about homeowners and what they care about, the growing demand for battery storage at the individual system level surely allows for homeowners to have greater savings and reduce their dependency on the utility. Now, if we move to the next slide. So what I would like to say is that we believe that in addition to all these trends that we are currently seeing happening, we see it all around us, we believe that the future holds something even greater by bringing together energy independence through creating a collective self-consumption communities. So if you imagine for a second a neighborhood, a community where individual homes produce their own power, store energy in a battery, and devices are operating in a way that is fully maximizing energy from the sun. So this system is going to be a smart system that is based on economic considerations and allowing to provide surplus energy to others within the network. And what I can tell you is that for SolarEdge, this vision and this idea is playing a huge role in the transition from being a PV supplier to providing a complete smart energy ecosystem. And that starts with battery storage. So if you're interested in hearing more from SolarEdge about battery storage, in the next slide, you can see all of our information for social media. We are providing updates, and we'd love for you to connect with us so we can stay in touch. Feel free to choose your own social network that works for you. And thank you so much for joining and listening, and bringing it back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Inmal. Great overview, giving the industry perspective. And to every one of the speakers, there's a lot of questions. So if you have an answer, it would be great if you could address them. Coming to the final part of our webinar. So we have now my colleague, Rafael Rossi, who is our head of market intel and responsible also for storage policy at Solar Power Europe, briefly present our policy asks that should enable strong growth, or even stronger growth than we predict in our medium scenario. And then we will have him discuss about these solar and storage policies with Gonzalo Fernandez Costa, policy officer at DG Energy of the European Commission, where he's working in the unit that deals day-to-day with storage and flexibility. So let's first start with Rafael.
Okay, thank you, and hello on my side. Yeah, maybe to begin with, I would like to re-emphasize again the couple of numbers that have stemmed out of our new report. And I think the first one is the milestone of 1 million home batteries that are operating in Europe by now, or it will be reached by 2022, as we are expecting to surpass 9 GWh of residential storage capacity by end of this year. And the second number, which is that by the end of this forecasting period, 2026, the number of home batteries will grow to 3.5 million under a most likely medium scenario, which is equal to a residential solar storage fleet of 32 GWh. However, it could be also more, up to 44 GWh, but also quite some less if the right policy frameworks are not in place. And this is the reason why we're asking policymakers to primarily develop a comprehensive strategy for electricity storage. And that includes a EU target of at least 200 gigawatts by 2030. And we need that to match the planned deployment of variable renewables like wind and solar that are planned under REPowerEU. We are very much aware of the solar target of 750 gigawatts, and wind also has quite important targets. This needs to be matched with storage and flexibility. By the way, we just published a white paper with detailed policy actions, which is available on our website and on social media. So if you're interested of our clear asks specifically on how to carry out this deployment of electricity storage strategy and targets, it's available there. Next, we are also urging to make solar mandatory for new and renovated residential buildings. The rooftop mandate that has been proposed by the Commission as part of the EPBD directive should be transposed at the national level as soon as possible. It will also be important to incentivize individual and collective sun consumption with a view to optimizing flexibility and congestion management, thus giving priority to solar consumption compared to grid feed-in is not only increasing the attachment rate between solar and batteries, but also helps decrease electricity price volatility on the one hand. It reduces the need of the grid capacity and also shields the end user from high electricity prices. Next, the DSO should evaluate their flexibility needs when they are preparing their network development plans, and they should also set up frameworks for unlocking and incentivize different sorts of flexibility. So in this context, it's important to roll out local flexibility markets and finalize the network code on demand side flexibility as soon as possible. And finally, it will be key to set an appropriate framework when it comes to sustainability of batteries, namely through the EU battery regulation, which we understand is close to finalization under trialogues. In this context, the rules should not become barriers to storage uptake. For example, by setting inappropriate minimum recycled content obligations, which could distort the market, or to set overly prescriptive design and data access requirements. So this in short, the policy recommendations, but I invite you to have a closer look in the report. The link is available in the Q&A. But now I would be delighted to discuss it with Gonzalo, who is with us. Gonzalo is the policy officer at DG Energy Unit B4, which, as mentioned, is the unit working on energy security and safety. So, Gonzalo, maybe to begin with, we are aware that the Commission has been working on the topic of storage as a whole in the past and is also currently active with some ongoing policy activities. Can you tell us a bit more on your work on storage so far and what are you planning in the near future?
Thank you very much, Rafael. And first of all, thank you all of you for this interesting outlook and the invitation to this webinar and very interesting presentations. I work, in fact, in the DG Energy in Unit B4, Security of Supply and Safety, and energy storage is very important policy work for us as a key technology ensuring security of supply, but there are many other units and colleagues also dealing with energy storage, as it requires a very cross-cutting approach when delivering and when making policy. So, in fact, energy storage plays a key role in achieving the Green Deal and the decarbonization objectives. It can integrate, help the integration of renewables, support the electrification of the economy, and increase flexibility, stability, and security of the energy system. And when we think about energy storage, all technologies, we mention we know that they have different maturity levels and different characteristics, and we think from standalone to behind the meter storage and also electric vehicles. So it is a complex topic, and that's why we have this cross-cutting approach when looking into energy storage. And in fact, we have already worked a lot on energy storage. The electricity sector is undergoing a profound transformation with the more decentralized markets, new actors, and a high share of renewables in the market. And in addition, with the current geopolitical circumstances, the development of renewable energy sources will increase in order to reduce dependency on fossil fuels, and also the goal of increasing energy savings and diversification of supplies, it is on the top of the agenda. So in this context, energy storage plays a very relevant role, and we can see this in many EU initiatives, for example, in Fit for 55, where with the renewable energy targets, or also with the proposal removing double taxation in the Energy Taxation Directive. There are also important elements under Horizon Europe for research and innovation, and under Recovery and Resilience Facility to support energy storage in different member states. And REPowerEU plan specifically highlights the importance of energy storage in ensuring flexibility and security of supply as a technology that can shift gas power plants and the use of gas during peak times. Energy storage has an important role to play also during in the ongoing initiative on emergency measures adopted by the Council. The recent one on the binding target for a 5% peak demand reduction, and also the ongoing discussions on the Council regulation on permitting, where co-located energy storage are facilitated together with renewable sources. And you probably know, the electricity market design is there is a discussions ongoing on the electricity market design revision. So your outlook and recommendations are very timely and very relevant elements to take into account, and that we will consider. And we are specifically working on a document, on a staff working document, to highlight the role of energy storage in this context, in the energy transition and under REPowerEU. This the approach we plan to adopt it as soon as possible, probably Q1 2023. And we want to highlight this role of energy storage in the transition, also clarify and discuss the current regulatory framework and the financing framework, and also to explore the potential barriers, solutions, and opportunities in the EU and also worldwide. So this staff working document will be based on several studies and also the input received. So your comments are already very welcome. And in addition to this staff working document, there are also works on the network code on demand side flexibility. This will also be a very important piece of legislation where specifically behind the meter and storage could play a very important role, and that this is now under discussion and will be relevant in the coming months.
Okay, thanks for the comprehensive overview, and good to see that the Commission has storage very clear on their minds when making policies, and also great to hear that we can contribute to your work through our reports and position papers. Maybe just to enter a bit into the details of battery storage. Where do you see this within the context of energy storage?
As I said before, there are two studies ongoing that will support somehow our policy. One study will be more on simulation and how it is the role of energy storage in the future energy system, 2030 and 2050, flexibility needs and the contribution from energy storage. And the other one will be the assessment of the current market and best practices. And here, clear conclusion is that the future energy system will increase the need for flexibility. The flexibility tools will be large and diverse, so from demand response, interconnections, and energy storage. And energy storage, there are many technologies that they compete among them and with different maturity levels and also different applications. And for sure, battery storage and behind the meter storage has an important role to play. Important role to play in the integration of renewables, increasing flexibility, stability, and security of the system, and also facilitating consumer energy management, so how they can increase and how can become more active consumers in the market.
Thank you. One of the main findings of the report is that indeed residential battery storage is very much dependent on solar PV. So PV becomes a very important enabler for storage deployment. And at utility scale level, we can see standalone storage that can business on its own. But for small scale, nearly every home storage is paired with residential solar PV. And this is the reason why some of our policy asks are about promotion of rooftop solar across Europe and providing incentives for self-consumption frameworks. Can you describe what the EU Commission approach is towards this? In particular, we saw some objectives under REPowerEU on storage and rooftop solar.
In terms of financing, last year in 2021, we launched a user session on financing and energy storage, and we had very nice discussions. And we in fact noticed that sometimes there are difficulties for energy storage in terms of financing, above all when because of the lack of visibility of revenues. So even if the incomes are enough for a business case, the lack of visibility make it a bit difficult to find this financing. There is probably not one solution that fits for all. So depending on the technology, the readiness level, the duration of energy storage, the application size, and all these kind of parameters, there may need different financing approaches. And of course, there are different mechanisms to do so. And specifically for behind the meter energy storage, there are maybe even more. There are possibilities to lease, to financing through savings, or with power purchase agreements. So there are many tools, I would say, there for financing energy storage behind the meter. And Inbal has explained very well the increasing relevance of active consumers. And in fact, active consumers is a key piece of the market design and the clean energy package adopted in 2019. Because energy, being active consumer, provide many benefits to the consumer, and having an energy storage behind the meter could increase these benefits, because it could, as very well explained, benefit the self-consumption and the self-production of renewable energy, and also adapt the consumption to the needs, and overall, at the end, reducing the energy bills for final consumers and increasing security of supply. In the Repower EU, we have specific objectives. The goal is to reduce our fossil dependency with more savings, accelerating the deployment of renewables, and increasing the diversification of energy sources. And energy storage has an important role to play, also together with solar energy. And this Repower EU also comes with several documents, like the EU Solar Strategy. This is a very important document that highlights the importance of increasing solar production, and also the European Solar Rooftop Initiative to increase this the deployment of solar, and also storage here has an important role to play.
Absolutely. As I mentioned today, we're publishing a position paper that tackles the role of electricity storage in the context of the EU ambition to become carbon neutral by 2050. So with a clear time horizon 2030, we're asking for the launch of a EU electricity storage strategy, including clear EU and national storage targets for 2030. What is your reaction to these asks? Is it something that you are considering within the context of your staff working document under preparation?
Thank you very much. And as you know, we are working on this staff working document, and all inputs are very welcome. In any case, after this staff working document, work will continue. And another piece of work is the electricity market design revision. There will be a public consultation by the end of the year. So here I think is the best place to put and to express all your views and ideas on how the market should be and how energy storage could be there promoted. And all views are very welcome. These recommendations will be taken into account, are very timely and relevant. So we will look into them. And again, I encourage you to express your views through this through this public consultation that will come soon. So in the meantime, we also take good note of the recommendations and we'll think what is the best approach on that. Thank you.
Okay, very clear. Another recommendation from our policy ask is that, or rather we highlight that there is a crucial role that is played not only by the EU alone, but also by member states. They have an important role. And if at EU level, it is important to set the right level of ambition and establish the overall storage strategy, it is the member states who have the task of establishing the condition for storage to be deployed in their national context. So against this background, what can the EU Commission do to support this process of member states, and what can the member states need to promote storage in their countries, in your view?
Indeed, the studies that we have launched also highlight that the market and regulatory conditions in each member state affect and determine the deployment of energy storage. In fact, this study will have some country-specific features, defining and explaining what is on in each member state. And we have seen that member states, that the markets that are growing faster are those that have specific ancillary services or specific supporting schemes. And this is the case of Germany and Italy that Christoph has explained before. And member states also have incorporated a definition and some strategies that also help the deployment and development of energy storage. And in conclusion, I would say that also high retail prices drives the deployment of energy storage behind the meter. the installation of PV plus storage systems are generally more favorable for those consumers that have high retail prices. So this is something that it is clear and that we notice. And at the end, it is up to member states how they implement the national framework and how they implement the EU framework in the best way to achieve their goals. So.
Thanks. We're close to the end, but I would like to ask you a couple more questions before we wrap up. The first one is that our report highlights that the deployment of small-scale storage is growing much faster than what we expected and probably what anyone would have expected. How do you make sure that this momentum is not slowed down by the lack of foresight and the lack of preparation from the various stakeholders?
This is, I'm glad to hear that it is developing well and there is a good momentum for the deployment of behind the meter energy storage. At the end, energy storage should be market driven. And indeed, there is a good opportunity for stakeholders. And I would say that it is up to them how they are better prepared to do so and to participate and supply the needs for the market. As mentioned before, supply chain is very important in this context. And from the regulatory point of view, I would say that the Clean Energy Package already set the good basis for this deployment of energy storage, including a common definition of energy storage, non-discriminatory participation in all markets. So the implementation should be a priority and the further initiatives should be based on this. And I come back again to the electricity market design revision. There will be a good room there for possible and potential improvements. And also with the demand flexibility network code that will somehow also address potential remaining barriers for demand response and also behind the meter energy storage.
Great. And maybe then as a last question still, we sense then the synergies between solar and storage have not been fully acknowledged by policymakers. For example, if we look at a place like the Netherlands, we see a challenge of grid constraints on the one hand, but also a non-existing battery storage market on the other hand. So I would like to ask as a final question, as a storage expert, what is your recommendation to better utilize solar and storage?
I again will say that a correct and full implementation of the electricity market design is the first step for a good deployment and development of energy storage. As energy storage should be market driven, it is good also to have the adequate regulatory and financing conditions to this. And I would say that the synergies between solar and storage are already reflected at EU level in the EU solar strategy, where it expresses and highlights that the combination of energy storage and PV and solar in general is very useful. It can help the integration of this self-consumption and also in the context of heating and transport, and also electric vehicles together with self-consumption and energy storage could play a very important role for active consumers. So in any case, we will continue working on identifying key action for the development and deployment of energy storage in the EU in the short term and medium term. A lot is going on, so we keep working.
Gonzalo, thank you very much for your insights. I think our audience also appreciated it a lot. I myself did. Thank you so much for this fireside chat. I give back the floor to Michael for concluding remarks.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Raffaele. Thanks to our guest, Gonzalo. Very insightful. Over 1 million homes have solar and storage attached in Europe in 2022. That's an amazing milestone. Wow, we would have not thought this when we started working on this report. So in a very, very short period, residential battery storage has established itself in a handful of European solar markets. In the leading markets, I'm talking here about Germany, battery storage has essentially become a standard component of a residential system. We want this to be replicated across Europe. That's why Solar Power Europe not only has come out with this residential battery market outlook to document the development, but also with a position paper asking for a European electricity storage strategy and a 2030 target, as Raffaele mentioned. Both documents are available for download on our website. And now, as I said in the beginning, this is our second last report launch. I just would like to save the date for the 19th December at 10 a.m. CET. That's when we will launch our European or EU market outlook, where we look in details in the solar market developments, both in the residential, commercial, residential, commercial, and utility scale markets. So we will take a comprehensive look of what's going on in the market, what has happened in 2022, and what we expect for the coming years. So looking forward to see you soon again. And so far, please have a nice rest of the afternoon. And thanks to everyone participating, to all the attendants, and obviously also to our sponsor, SolarEdge. Thank you.